Good evening. This is Alex Mercer with breaking news on what we are calling the most catastrophic military accident in human history. We are receiving unconfirmed reports from multiple international sources that approximately 90 minutes ago, at what would have been 1400 hours Greenwich Mean Time, a cascading systems failure within the global nuclear command infrastructure resulted in the simultaneous unauthorized launch of strategic nuclear weapons from at least 7 nuclear-armed nations. I want to stress that information is fragmentary at this stage. Communications networks are degrading rapidly, and we are working to verify every detail before we share it with you. What we know with certainty is that the United States Department of Defense issued an emergency broadcast at 14:23 GMT stating that an unspecified number of intercontinental ballistic missiles were detected leaving their silos across 3 separate ICBM fields in Montana, North Dakota, and Wyoming without proper authorization codes. Within 17 minutes, similar reports emerged from the Russian Federation, followed by France, the United Kingdom, China, India, Pakistan, and Israel. We are now approximately 1 hour and 47 minutes into this crisis.
Alex, I think it's important for our listeners to understand what people are experiencing right now in cities that may be in the path of these weapons. We've been monitoring emergency services channels and social media platforms that are still operational, and what we're seeing is a mixture of absolute terror and extraordinary acts of human courage. In cities across the Northern Hemisphere, millions of people received alert notifications on their phones telling them to seek immediate shelter. Parents are gathering their children, neighbors are helping elderly residents into basements, strangers are opening their homes to those caught outside. We've received messages from listeners in Seattle, Denver, Chicago, and dozens of other cities describing the sound of air raid sirens that many people have never heard before outside of monthly tests. One message from a teacher in Minneapolis describes how she's sheltering 43 students in a school basement, singing songs to keep them calm while she herself is trying not to break down. These are the moments that define us as a species.
Sierra, I need to update you and our listeners on the technical situation because it's becoming clearer and more dire with each passing minute. We now have confirmation from multiple defense analysts that the initial triggering event appears to have been a coordinated cyber intrusion that exploited previously unknown vulnerabilities in the command and control systems that were supposed to prevent exactly this scenario. The intrusion, according to preliminary analysis from cybersecurity firms that are still able to communicate, was not an act of war by a nation-state, but appears to have been an unintentional trigger embedded in a widely deployed software update across military systems. This is critical. This was not a deliberate attack. This was a catastrophic accident stemming from interconnected systems that were never supposed to be networked in the ways they had become over decades of incremental technological evolution. The estimate we're receiving now is that somewhere between 4,200 and 5,800 nuclear warheads left their launch platforms. Not all will reach their targets due to missile defense systems, mechanical failures, and interception attempts. But the numbers we're looking at are apocalyptic.
We need to talk about what's happening right now in the first cities that were struck. Alex, we're now approximately 2 hours and 30 minutes into this event, and the first weapons have detonated. We're receiving reports, and I want to be very careful with how I present this information because we know families are listening, that multiple population centers in Russia, including suburbs of Moscow and St. Petersburg, have been hit. Similarly, we have unconfirmed reports of strikes in the vicinity of Washington, D.C., though the capital itself may have been spared due to missile defense systems. London, Beijing, Tel Aviv, Tehran, Islamabad, and Mumbai are all reporting detonations within or near their metropolitan areas. The immediate casualties are impossible to calculate, but we need to be honest with you. We are likely talking about millions of people who have died in the last 30 minutes. Millions more are critically injured with burns, trauma, and radiation exposure in areas where hospitals have been destroyed or rendered inaccessible. I cannot adequately describe the scale of human suffering that is unfolding as I speak to you.
The cascade of secondary effects is what concerns defense analysts right now as much as the direct strikes. We're seeing comprehensive failure of electrical grids across vast swaths of the northern hemisphere due to electromagnetic pulse effects from high-altitude detonations. The entire eastern seaboard of the United States is dark from Maine to Georgia. Western Europe has lost power from France through Poland. These EMP bursts have destroyed transformers and electrical infrastructure that will take months, if not years, to replace even under normal circumstances. And these are decidedly not normal circumstances. Communications satellites are going dark. We've lost contact with multiple ground stations. The internet as a functional global network has effectively ceased to exist for most of the world. What you're hearing right now is only possible because this station has backup generators and hardened systems that were installed during the Cold War and maintained by people who understood that this day might actually come. We are likely one of the last radio stations broadcasting on conventional frequencies that can reach beyond our immediate region.
I want to read you a message that came through our emergency line about 6 minutes ago from a trauma surgeon at what she describes as what used to be a hospital, approximately 40 miles from a strike zone in what we believe is somewhere in the American Midwest. She writes, "We have no power except one generator. We have no running water. We have hundreds of people with burns over more than half their bodies. We have no morphine left. We have no way to treat radiation sickness. People are dying in our parking lot because we can't even get them inside. The ones who can still talk are asking about their families, and we have no information to give them. I don't know how to be a doctor in this situation. I don't know what I'm supposed to do." That was from Dr. Sarah Mitchell, and if you're listening, doctor, you're doing everything humanly possible. You're bearing witness to the worst moment in human history, and you're still there helping people. That's what humanity looks like when everything else is stripped away.
We're now 3 hours and 15 minutes into this catastrophe. I'm receiving updated information about the trajectory of weapons that have not yet reached their targets. Missile defense systems in the United States, Russia, Israel, and other nations have successfully intercepted somewhere between 11 and 18% of incoming warheads, according to preliminary estimates from military tracking systems that are still functional. That sounds like a meaningful number until you understand that it means roughly 82 to 89% of launched weapons are still traveling toward their destinations or have already detonated. We're tracking approximately 230 ICBM trajectories that are still in flight, meaning we will see additional strikes over the next 20 to 40 minutes. Cities we know are in projected impact zones include Phoenix, Dallas, Atlanta, Seattle, Toronto, Mexico City, Caracas, Manchester, Berlin, Rome, Cairo, Riyadh, Karachi, Kolkata, Bangkok, Seoul, Osaka, and Sydney. These projections are based on orbital tracking data and may not be entirely accurate, but civil defense authorities in these cities have been notified where communications still exist.
Alex, I need to interrupt you because we're getting reports of something that goes beyond the nuclear strikes themselves. Coastal cities are reporting unusual seismic activity. We're hearing from emergency services in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Vancouver, Tokyo, Manila, and Wellington that they're detecting earthquake swarms, tremors that started approximately 40 minutes ago and are increasing in intensity. Seismologists are stating that the sheer number of detonations, particularly ground bursts that were targeting hardened military installations, may be triggering seismic responses along existing fault lines. The Pacific Ring of Fire is showing unusual activity. We don't yet know if this is a temporary phenomenon or if we're looking at a cascading geological crisis on top of the nuclear catastrophe. What I do know is that people in these cities are now facing a dual threat. radiation, and fallout from strikes on neighboring areas, and the very real possibility of major earthquakes triggered by the largest simultaneous release of destructive energy in planetary history.
Let me provide you with the casualty estimates we have at this point, and I want to emphasize these are extremely preliminary and are almost certainly underestimating the true scope. Based on confirmed detonations in heavily populated areas, we are looking at a minimum of 38 million immediate fatalities from blast effects and thermal radiation within the first 2 hours. That number will rise substantially over the next 72 hours as we account for radiation exposure, injuries that prove fatal due to lack of medical care, and people trapped in collapsed structures. The World Health Organization, operating from a backup facility in Geneva that is still communicating, has issued a statement projecting that if even a modest fraction of the nuclear arsenals have been deployed, we are looking at somewhere between 250 million and 400 million deaths within the first week. Those numbers do not account for secondary effects: starvation, disease, radiation sickness in areas not directly struck but affected by fallout, and the complete breakdown of medical and social services across vast regions of the planet.
We need to shift our focus for a moment to what's happening with refugees and evacuation efforts, because there are millions of people right now trying to flee zones that they believe will be hit or are already contaminated with fallout. We're receiving reports from state highways across the American interior showing traffic jams stretching for 50 and 60 miles as people attempt to drive away from cities. Many vehicles are running out of fuel because gas stations have no power to operate their pumps. In Europe, trains have stopped running due to power failures, trapping people in stations. We're hearing accounts of families walking along motorways with whatever possessions they could carry, heading away from population centers without clear destinations, just trying to put distance between themselves and danger. In the global south, where many nations were not direct targets of nuclear strikes, governments are closing borders and mobilizing military forces not to help, but to prevent the anticipated flood of refugees from the Northern Hemisphere. We are witnessing the largest human migration in history occurring under the worst possible circumstances.
It's now been 4 hours and 7 minutes since the initial launches. We have verification of additional strikes within the past 30 minutes. Multiple weapons have detonated across the Great Plains of North America, apparently targeting ICBM silos that had already launched their missiles. A tactical redundancy that seems almost absurdly wasteful given the circumstances. Similar patterns are being observed in Russia, where strike assessments suggest that automated systems continued to target military installations even after those installations had already been destroyed by earlier warheads. In total, we now have confirmation of strikes on approximately 197 distinct locations across 6 continents. Antarctica has been spared, though multiple research stations there have lost communication and are presumed to be cut off without resupply capabilities. The acoustic monitoring stations in the Southern Ocean that track seismic events are recording detonations at a rate that suggests we're still not at the end of this launch sequence.
I want to share with you some of the messages we've been receiving from people around the world, because I think it's important that we document what human beings are saying to each other at this moment. From someone named James in Auckland, New Zealand. We're watching the sky turn strange colors as the sun sets. Scientists here are saying it's ash and aerosols in the upper atmosphere from the northern detonations already reaching us. My daughter is 5 years old and she asked me if the world is ending. I told her no, but I don't know if that's true. I told her that people are strong and will find a way through this. I need that to be true. From Marie in Nairobi, Kenya. We are untouched here, but we know what is coming. Food supplies, medicine, everything we import will stop. But we are organizing. Neighborhoods are pooling resources, hospitals are preparing for refugees, churches are opening shelters. We will help whoever comes. We will not turn away from this. These messages, this is what we need to hold on to. This is the evidence that humanity is more than our weapons.
I need to update our listeners on the governmental response, or what remains of governmental structures. The United States government has invoked continuity of operations protocols. The President, whose location has not been disclosed, but is presumed to be at one of several hardened command facilities, issued a recorded statement approximately 30 minutes ago that we're going to play for you now. The audio quality is poor due to atmospheric interference. My fellow Americans, we are facing an unprecedented catastrophe resulting from what preliminary analysis indicates was a failure of our command and control systems. This was not an act of war. I repeat, this was not an intentional attack by any nation. This was a systems failure of catastrophic magnitude. I am declaring a state of emergency across all 50 states. Martial law is in effect. Military forces are being deployed to maintain order and assist in humanitarian operations. I urge every American to follow the instructions of local emergency services, to shelter in place if you are in a safe location, and to help your neighbors. We will survive this. We will rebuild. May God be with us all. That was recorded approximately 45 minutes ago and is being broadcast on loop across all remaining emergency alert systems.
The international response is fragmented because international institutions have effectively ceased to function. The United Nations headquarters in New York is in a zone that was struck. We have no confirmation on casualties, but given the location and blast radius, we must assume significant loss of life among diplomatic personnel and staff. The European Union is attempting to coordinate from Brussels, but with communications severely degraded and member states focused on their own national emergencies. The concept of coordinated international response seems almost quaint at this moment. What we are seeing instead are individual nations, cities, and communities making decisions in isolation based on incomplete information. Some nations are mobilizing military forces to secure borders. Others are opening their territories to refugees. There is no global plan because there is no longer a functioning global community in any meaningful sense. We are fragmenting back into isolated populations making local decisions about survival.
We're now approaching the 5-hour mark since initial launches. The seismic activity that Sierra mentioned earlier is intensifying. We're receiving reports from the United States Geological Survey, operating from a facility in Golden, Colorado, that somehow remains operational, that they have detected over 2,000 seismic events in the past 3 hours above magnitude 3.0. 27 of these events exceeded magnitude 6.0. The largest was a magnitude 7.4 earthquake that struck along the San Andreas Fault in California approximately 43 minutes ago. The combination of ground-burst nuclear detonations at several military installations in the western United States and the existing tectonic stress along the fault system has apparently triggered a seismic event that, under normal circumstances, would be a major disaster in its own right. Under current circumstances, it is a footnote. Los Angeles and San Francisco, already facing nuclear strikes on nearby military installations and complete power grid failure, are now also dealing with severe earthquake damage. The death toll from the earthquake alone is estimated to be in the tens of thousands.
Alex, we're getting disturbing reports from coastal areas around the world about ocean behavior. Tsunami warning centers in Hawaii, Japan, Chile, and Indonesia are reporting unusual wave patterns detected by those buoys that are still transmitting data. The concern is that the seismic events triggered by the nuclear detonations, particularly those near coastal areas and undersea geological features, may be generating tsunami waves. We have confirmation of a wave approximately 11 meters high that struck the eastern coast of Japan about 20 minutes ago, hitting areas that were already devastated by the Fukushima disaster years ago and had just begun to recover. Coastal communities from Alaska to Chile are being advised to move to high ground immediately, but with communications down and emergency services overwhelmed, We don't know how many people are receiving these warnings. The ocean has become another threat in a situation that already seemed to contain every possible horror.
Let me give you an updated assessment of infrastructure damage because this is going to determine survival over the coming weeks and months. The electrical grid across North America is somewhere between 70 and 85% non-functional. Those portions that remain operational are isolated pockets, not connected into any coherent network. Western Europe is similarly dark. The Russian Federation's power infrastructure is estimated to be 90% destroyed. China's grid status is unknown due to complete communications blackout, but satellite imagery from the few observational satellites still functioning shows darkness across the Eastern Industrial Corridor, where 300 million people live. Water treatment facilities require electrical power to operate. Those that had backup generators are running through their fuel reserves, which typically last between 48 and 72 hours. After that, clean water ceases to be available to urban populations. Sewage treatment stops. We are looking at medieval sanitary conditions in modern cities within the next 3 days. The implications for disease and public health are catastrophic.
I want to talk about the specific human dimension of what Alex just described, because I don't think people fully understand what it means when we say water treatment facilities stop operating. It means that in cities like Chicago, Philadelphia, Houston, Phoenix, and hundreds of others, approximately 40 to 50 million people in the United States alone will not have access to safe drinking water within 3 days. They will not be able to flush toilets. They will not be able to wash wounds or sterilize medical equipment. In the summer heat that much of the Northern Hemisphere is experiencing right now, dehydration becomes a survival threat within days. Children and elderly people are most vulnerable. People with certain medical conditions cannot survive without clean water for medications and dialysis. We are about to see death from thirst in modern cities for the first time in more than a century. And this is happening simultaneously with radiation exposure, with medical facilities that are non-functional, with food supply chains that have been completely severed. Every single system that makes modern urban life possible is failing at once.
We're now 6 hours into this crisis. I have updated casualty figures, though I must stress these are estimates based on extremely fragmentary information. Confirmed deaths from direct strike effects are now estimated at 62 million people. This includes blast casualties, thermal radiation burns that proved immediately fatal, and acute radiation syndrome in the highest exposure zones. Projected deaths over the next 72 hours are estimated at an additional 90 to 120 million people from injuries, radiation exposure, lack of medical care, and what we're now seeing as deaths from the seismic and tsunami events that followed the strikes. We are in territory where numbers start to lose meaning. 62 million dead is a figure that our minds cannot really process. That's the entire population of the United Kingdom gone in 6 hours. That's everyone in California and Texas combined. And the deaths are going to continue escalating because we have not yet begun to experience the full effects of radiation fallout, which is beginning to settle across vast areas that were not directly targeted.
Alex, we need to tell our listeners what they need to know about fallout if they're in areas that were not directly struck. The heavier radioactive particles from detonations are being carried by wind patterns and will settle to ground level over the next 12 to 72 hours depending on distance from strike zones and weather conditions. For people who are listening to this broadcast right now in areas that were not hit, your survival may depend on understanding this information. If you have access to a basement or an underground shelter, that is where you need to be for at least the next 48 to 72 hours, longer if possible. Every bit of material between you and the outside world reduces radiation exposure. If you cannot get to a basement, go to the center of the most interior room, of the most solid structure available. Stay away from windows. Do not go outside for any reason unless your life is in immediate danger from something other than radiation. If you must go outside, cover as much skin as possible. When you come back inside, remove clothing before entering your shelter space and wash exposed skin if clean water is available. These basic precautions can mean the difference between life and death for millions of people over the next week.
We're receiving information about military responses around the world, and I need to share this carefully because the situation remains extremely fluid and dangerous. Multiple nations that still have functioning military command structures have mobilized armed forces, ostensibly for humanitarian assistance and to maintain order. But there are concerning reports of military units seizing control of resources, establishing checkpoints that are blocking civilian movement, and in some cases firing on groups of refugees attempting to cross borders. We have unconfirmed reports from the border region between Poland and Germany of military forces on both sides preventing populations from moving across the frontier. Similar reports are coming from the United States-Mexico border, the border between India and Bangladesh, and multiple frontiers in Africa. The fear appears to be that uncontrolled population movements will overwhelm the limited resources that remain in areas that were not directly affected. This represents a fundamental breakdown in the humanitarian principles that are supposed to govern civilized nations, but we are no longer in a world where those principles hold any authority.
This is an impossible thing to have to say on the air, but we're receiving reports that some military units and some police forces have simply abandoned their posts. In some cases, personnel are going home to try to protect their own families. In other cases, particularly in areas where command structures have been completely destroyed and no orders are being received, units have disintegrated with individuals making their own survival decisions. This means that in many cities and regions, there is no organized law enforcement, no organized military presence, and no governmental authority of any kind. Some communities are coming together, organizing neighborhood watches, pooling resources, and trying to maintain order through collective action. Other areas are descending into violence as groups fight over food, water, medicine, and shelter. There is no single story of how humanity is responding to this. There are millions of stories, and they range from the most beautiful expressions of cooperation and sacrifice to the most horrible examples of violence and selfishness.
It's been 7 hours and 20 minutes since the first launches. We have verification now that the launch sequence has concluded. No new missiles have been detected leaving their platforms in the last 90 minutes. We are at the end of the launch phase of this catastrophe, but we are only at the beginning of the consequences. The final tally of weapons launched appears to be approximately 5,300 nuclear warheads. Of these, roughly 1,100 were intercepted by missile defense systems or failed to detonate due to mechanical issues. That means approximately 4,200 nuclear weapons successfully detonated across the planet. The largest concentrations of strikes were in the northern hemisphere, particularly across North America, Europe, and Asia. The southern hemisphere was relatively spared from direct strikes, though we are already seeing atmospheric effects reaching that region, and the economic and social disruption will be global in scope.
We need to talk about what happens next in terms of the atmosphere and climate, because this is going to affect everyone on Earth regardless of where they are or whether their region was directly struck. The amount of material that has been injected into the stratosphere by 4,200 nuclear detonations is unprecedented in human history. We're talking about millions of tons of ash, dust, and aerosols that are being carried by atmospheric currents and will distribute globally over the next several weeks. Scientists have been warning about nuclear winter scenarios for decades. We are now living through that scenario. The particles in the stratosphere will reflect sunlight back into space, reducing the amount of solar radiation reaching the Earth's surface. Temperature predictions suggest we could see a global temperature drop of anywhere from 5 to 15 degrees Celsius over the next several months. Growing seasons will be disrupted. Crops that are currently in fields will likely fail. Rainfall patterns will change. We are looking at global famine as a certainty over the next year. affecting even regions that were not touched by the weapons themselves.
Let me give you the assessment we have from climate scientists who are still able to communicate their analysis. Based on the scale of the detonations, we are looking at what they're calling a severe nuclear winter scenario. Within 2 to 3 weeks, temperatures will begin to drop noticeably across the northern hemisphere. Within 6 to 8 weeks, the temperature effects will be global. Agricultural production will essentially cease across most of the planet for at least 1 to 2 years, possibly longer. Global food reserves under normal circumstances represent approximately 70 to 90 days of supply. Those reserves are now largely destroyed or inaccessible due to infrastructure collapse in the regions where they were stored. We are looking at the starvation of hundreds of millions of people, possibly billions, even in areas that were never struck by nuclear weapons. The climate effects of this catastrophe may ultimately kill more people than the weapons themselves.
Alex, I think we need to be very direct with our listeners about what this means for them personally, because I believe people deserve to know the truth, even when that truth is almost unbearably difficult. If you are listening to this broadcast right now, your life has changed forever, regardless of where you are. If you live in a major city in the Northern Hemisphere, your chances of survival beyond the next few months are uncertain at best. If you live in a rural area with access to food production, clean water, and shelter, your chances are better but still compromised by radiation fallout, the climate effects we've discussed, and the likely arrival of desperate refugees from urban areas. If you live in the Southern Hemisphere in a region that was not struck, you have the best chance of physical survival, but you will be facing food shortages, economic collapse, and massive social disruption as the reality of what has happened ripples across the planet. There is no safe place anymore. There is no unchanged place. We are all in this together now.
We're now 8 hours into this event. Let me give you an updated picture of what remains of governmental authority and infrastructure. In the United States, we have a functioning president and what appears to be an intact continuity of government system, though the actual effectiveness of that government is questionable given the communications breakdown. Most state governments have lost contact with federal authorities and are operating independently. In Russia, the situation is unclear, but we have indications that regional military commanders are making independent decisions without clear orders from Moscow. The Chinese government's status is completely unknown due to total communications blackout. The European Union as a functional organization has ceased to exist. Individual European nations are focused on their own survival. The United Kingdom is operating under emergency protocols with the government relocated to hardened facilities outside London, which was struck. Japan's government is intact but facing multiple simultaneous crises from nuclear strikes, tsunami damage, and radiation exposure. India and Pakistan, which exchanged multiple strikes with each other, have governments that appear to have survived, but are dealing with massive casualties and infrastructure damage.
We're getting reports of spontaneous community organization in areas where formal government has collapsed or is absent. In cities across the United States, Canada, and Europe, neighborhoods are forming councils, rationing resources, establishing security patrols, and caring for injured people as best they can. Churches, mosques, synagogues, and temples are becoming centers for these community efforts. Schools are being converted into emergency shelters and medical clinics despite having no supplies. I want to share a message we received from someone named Thomas in what he describes as a suburb of Atlanta. Our neighborhood has about 200 houses. We've gone door to door and we know we have 17 people with serious injuries, about 40 people with some level of radiation exposure, and 3 women who are pregnant. We've pooled all the food we have and we're rationing it to last 30 days. We've organized security teams to keep order and protect against outsiders. We're digging a well because we know the water will stop soon. We're teaching each other survival skills. I'm a software engineer and I've never thought about any of this before, but we're learning. We're becoming something else. We're becoming the people who might survive this.
The reality of resource scarcity is beginning to set in across unaffected areas as people realize that supply chains have completely collapsed. We're receiving reports of panic buying that has emptied stores within hours in cities across South America, Africa, Australia, and Southeast Asia. In many cases, store owners have simply locked their doors and disappeared with their inventory, rather than face mobs of desperate customers. Gasoline supplies are being depleted rapidly as people attempt to fuel vehicles for evacuation or to power generators. We're hearing accounts of violence erupting at gas stations, grocery stores, and pharmacies. Several cities in South America have implemented martial law and shoot-on-sight orders for looters. This is happening in regions that were not even struck, that don't face immediate radiation threats, but where the social fabric is disintegrating due to fear and the knowledge that normal life is over. This is a preview of what the entire world will look like in the coming weeks as scarcity becomes universal.
I want to read you another message, this one from Dr. Jennifer Kowalski, who identifies herself as an epidemiologist. She writes, I need the world to understand what's about to happen from a public health perspective. In cities where water treatment has stopped, we're going to see outbreaks of cholera, typhoid, and dysentery within 1 to 2 weeks. With no functioning sanitation, disease will spread exponentially. Hospitals are destroyed or without power. We have no way to manufacture or distribute antibiotics. We have no way to deliver vaccines. People with chronic conditions like diabetes, heart disease, and kidney disease are going to die as their medications run out. We're going to see the return of diseases we thought we'd conquered. Polio, measles, tuberculosis will reemerge in populations with collapsing immunity due to malnutrition. The medieval plagues could return. The nuclear weapons killed millions in hours, but disease and starvation will kill hundreds of millions over months and years. This is the hidden catastrophe that people aren't yet thinking about.
We're now 9 hours and 35 minutes into this catastrophe. I have updated casualty estimates that I need to share, and I'm going to present these as soberly as possible because these numbers represent individual human lives, and we must not become numb to their meaning. Confirmed immediate deaths from nuclear strikes are now estimated at 88 million people. Projected deaths over the next week from radiation exposure, injuries, and cascade effects are estimated at an additional 150 to 200 million. That takes us to approximately 250 to 290 million deaths within the first week. Projected deaths over the next 3 months from starvation, disease, radiation sickness, and exposure range from 500 million to 1.2 billion people. These projections assume best-case scenarios for organization of survivor populations and some restoration of basic services in certain regions. Worst-case projections suggest the death toll could reach 2 billion people within 6 months.
Alex, I need us to stop for a moment and acknowledge what we're doing here. We're sitting in this radio station, we're protected by generators and emergency systems, we have some food and water, and we're narrating the end of the world as we've known it. We're speaking to people who may not survive the night. We're speaking to people who are listening to us while their children die in their arms. We're speaking to people who are trapped in collapsed buildings waiting for rescue that will never come. I don't know what our responsibility is in this moment. I don't know if we're providing valuable information or if we're just bearing witness. But I think we have to continue. I think someone needs to document this. Someone needs to speak the names of the places being lost, to acknowledge the scale of what's happening, to remind whoever survives that every number was a person, every statistic was someone's child or parent or lover or friend. This matters. The truth matters even when the truth is unbearable.
Sierra, you're right. And I think what we're doing here is important. Let me tell you about some of the places that are gone. Not damaged, not struggling, but simply gone. Washington, D.C. exists as a name, but the city has been reduced to rubble and fire. The centers of Moscow and St. Petersburg are craters. Beijing's population of 21 million people has been reduced by approximately 90% based on satellite thermal imaging. Tokyo faced strikes on multiple targets and is largely destroyed. London was struck despite defensive systems. Paris was hit. Berlin, Rome, Tehran, Riyadh, Mumbai, Seoul, Manila. These cities still exist as geographical locations, but as functioning human communities they have ceased to be. We're talking about the destruction of thousands of years of accumulated human culture, art, architecture, and history. The Louvre is gone. The British Museum is gone. The treasures of human civilization that we thought we were preserving for future generations have been incinerated.
We're getting reports from refugee columns and evacuation routes that I need to share because they tell us something important about human nature under extreme duress. On a highway in what used to be central Germany, a group of about 200 people are traveling together in vehicles and on foot, heading south toward the Alps. One of them sent us a message describing how they've organized themselves. They're sharing food, taking turns walking so that children and elderly people can ride in vehicles, posting scouts to watch for dangers. They've established rules for the group. No one gets left behind. Resources are shared equally. Disputes are resolved by vote. This is a community forming in real time out of strangers who happen to be on the same road at the same time. But we're also hearing horrific stories from other routes where groups have turned on each other, where the strong have taken from the weak, where violence has become the default method of resolving any conflict. We contain both possibilities as a species. We are capable of both the best and worst responses to crisis.
It's now been 10 hours since the initial launches. We're receiving our first reports of fallout beginning to settle in areas that were not directly struck. Radiation monitoring stations that remain operational in parts of the American Midwest are detecting elevated levels consistent with fallout from the strikes on the Great Plains YCBM fields. Similar reports are coming from Scandinavia, detecting fallout from the Russian strikes. Eastern Europe is showing extremely high readings from multiple strike zones. The winds are carrying this material hundreds and thousands of miles from the detonation sites. Areas that thought they were safe, that were far from any target, are now being contaminated. This is why shelter discipline is so critical. If you're listening to this and you're not in a shelter, you need to get to one immediately. Every hour of exposure increases your radiation dose and decreases your chances of long-term survival. This is not metaphorical. This is physics. The radiation will damage your cells. It will destroy your bone marrow's ability to produce blood cells. It will cause cancers that will kill you months or years from now. Shelter immediately if you haven't already.
We need to talk about children because they are the most vulnerable population in every aspect of this catastrophe. Children have smaller bodies that concentrate radiation dose more intensely. Children require more food and water proportionally than adults. Children are psychologically traumatized by violence and separation from parents in ways that will affect them forever if they survive. We're receiving reports from shelters and makeshift refugee centers of children who have been orphaned, who have watched their parents die, who have been separated from families in the chaos of evacuation. There are thousands, probably tens of thousands of children who are alone right now with no adult to care for them. Some communities are organizing to care for these children collectively. Other children are simply being left behind as groups move on because they don't have the resources to feed extra mouths. This is the moral calculus of catastrophe. How do you choose between feeding your own child and feeding someone else's child when there isn't enough food for both? These are decisions that no one should ever have to make, but millions of people are making them right now.
We're now approaching the 12-hour mark since initial launches. let me give you an assessment of global military capabilities and the potential for ongoing conflict, because this is a question we're getting from many listeners. The simple answer is that organized military conflict on a large scale is no longer possible. The nuclear-armed nations have expended their strategic arsenals. The infrastructure required to conduct modern military operations, communications, logistics, fuel supplies, command and control, has been comprehensively destroyed in the nations that were primary targets. We are not looking at a situation where there will be continuing wars between nation-states. What we are looking at is a much more fragmented picture of local military units, with varying degrees of organization acting independently, regional commanders making their own decisions, and in many cases military forces simply dissolving as personnel desert to care for their families. There will be violence. There will be conflict over resources, but it will be local and chaotic rather than organized warfare.
I want to share a perspective from someone who sent us a message identifying himself as a former military officer. He writes, "I served 23 years. I believed in the system. I believed in the chain of command and the mission and the idea that we were keeping people safe. All of that is gone now. Every weapon we built to deter our enemies from attacking us has been used by accident. We destroyed ourselves through our own failures. The greatest military forces in human history could not prevent this. All that power, all that technology, all those trillions of dollars and decades of planning, and we ended up annihilating ourselves through a software error. I don't know what the lesson is here, except that maybe we should never have built these weapons in the first place. Maybe the only winning move was not to play, but we did play, and we lost. And everyone lost with us."
As we approach 13 hours into this catastrophe, we're beginning to see the early stages of what will be the dominant narrative of the coming weeks: the struggle for food. Agricultural production has stopped in the northern hemisphere. The crops that were in fields have either been destroyed by blast effects and fires, or they're now contaminated with radiation and cannot be safely consumed. The food that exists is whatever was in warehouses, stores, and homes at the moment the crisis began. In urban areas of the developed world, that represents approximately 3 to 5 days of supply under normal consumption patterns. But with panic and hoarding, those supplies have been depleted in many places within the first 12 hours. In rural areas, particularly in developing nations where subsistence agriculture is still common, there are greater food reserves, but these populations will face different challenges as refugees from cities arrive and place pressure on local resources. We are going to see famine on a scale that humanity has not experienced since the pre-modern era. Starvation will be the leading cause of death over the next 6 to 12 months.
We're receiving reports from aid organizations, or what's left of aid organizations, that are trying to respond to this crisis. The International Red Cross is attempting to coordinate relief efforts but faces insurmountable challenges. The regions that need the most help are either completely inaccessible due to radiation or cannot be reached because transportation infrastructure has been destroyed. The regions that have resources and could potentially provide aid are closing their borders and refusing to send supplies out of fear that they'll need everything they have for their own populations. We are seeing the complete failure of international humanitarian cooperation. Some local organizations, church groups, community associations are doing heroic work to help people in their immediate areas, but there is no large-scale organized relief effort, and there will not be one. Every community is going to have to survive on whatever resources it has or can scavenge from nearby areas. The concept of humanitarian aid as we've understood it for the last century has ceased to exist.
We're now 14 hours into this event. Let me give you an updated picture of the atmospheric situation, because this is going to dominate conditions for everyone on Earth, regardless of location. The smoke and particulate matter from fires burning in destroyed cities, from forests that have been ignited by thermal radiation, from the detonations themselves is beginning to create a visible haze in the upper atmosphere. In parts of North America and Europe that have clear skies, people are reporting that the sun appears dimmer and has an unusual color, described as brownish or orange rather than the normal yellow. This is the beginning of the nuclear winter effect. Over the next several days and weeks, this haze will spread globally and intensify. The temperature drops we discussed earlier will begin to be noticeable within 10 to 14 days in the northern hemisphere. The southern hemisphere will experience temperature effects within 4 to 6 weeks as the atmospheric circulation patterns carry the particles south. This is irreversible on any timescale relevant to human survival. We are locked into a planetary climate shift that will last months to years.
Alex, I want to talk about something that I don't think we've adequately addressed, which is the psychological trauma that every single person on Earth is experiencing right now. Even people who are physically uninjured, who are in areas that weren't struck, who have food and shelter, are experiencing a form of trauma that goes beyond anything humanity has collectively faced before. The knowledge that most of the world as we knew it is gone, that billions of people are dying or will die, that the future we imagine for ourselves and our children no longer exists. This is a weight that I don't think the human mind is fully equipped to process. We're going to see epidemic levels of depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, and suicide in the coming weeks and months. People who survive physically may not survive psychologically. The ones who do survive will be changed in fundamental ways. We're all going to carry this with us forever. There is no therapy adequate to this moment. There is no healing that will ever make us whole again.
We're receiving reports that governments in several southern hemisphere nations that were not directly struck are attempting to establish some form of international coordination. Brazil, Argentina, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and Indonesia have managed to maintain communication among themselves and are discussing the formation of what they're calling a continuity council to preserve some structure of international governance and cooperation. The challenge they face is enormous. These nations collectively represent perhaps 15% of global economic capacity under normal circumstances, and even that capacity is rapidly degrading as they lose access to imports, technology, and resources that they previously obtained from the now destroyed industrial centers of the Northern Hemisphere. Their proposal, as we understand it, is to establish protocols for refugee resettlement, food distribution, preservation of scientific and technical knowledge, and maintenance of communication networks. Whether this effort will succeed, or whether these nations will ultimately follow the same path of fragmentation and collapse that we're seeing in the North, is unknown.
We need to update listeners on the situation with nuclear power plants, because this is an ongoing and escalating crisis that hasn't received adequate attention in our coverage so far. There are approximately 440 operational nuclear power reactors worldwide. These reactors require constant cooling even after they're shut down, and that cooling requires either grid power or backup diesel generators. With the grid down across most of the Northern Hemisphere and fuel supplies for generators finite, we are facing the prospect of multiple reactor meltdowns over the next several days to weeks. We already have confirmation of cooling failures at reactor sites in France, the United States, and Japan. The Fukushima disaster in 2011 involved 3 reactors. We are potentially looking at dozens of reactors melting down simultaneously. Each one will release massive amounts of radioactive material into the environment. The radiation effects of the nuclear weapons themselves will be compounded by these reactor failures. Large areas of Europe, North America, and Asia will become uninhabitable not just from weapons fallout, but from reactor contamination.
It's now been 16 hours since the initial launches. Casualty estimates continue to climb as we get better information from areas that have reestablished some form of communication. Current estimates place immediate deaths at approximately 112 million people. Projected deaths over the next 72 hours are an additional 200 million. That takes us to just over 300 million dead within the first week. For context, that's approximately 4% of the global human population. The projections for 3-month mortality remain in the range of 500 million to 1.2 billion, which would be 6 to 15% of global population. The projections for 12-month mortality are ranging from 1.5 billion to 3.5 billion people, which would be 19 to 44% of the human population. These are not abstract numbers. These are people. Every single one is a person who had a life, had people who loved them, had dreams and fears and memories. We must not forget that.
We're starting to hear reports of people making impossible choices about survival. A message from someone in rural Montana describes a situation where a group of about 50 people has taken shelter in a school building. They have enough food for perhaps 2 weeks if they ration carefully. Yesterday, a group of about 20 more people arrived seeking shelter. The original group voted and decided not to let them in because the food wouldn't stretch far enough. The newcomers are still outside the building. Some have already left. Some are still there, begging to be let in. The person who sent this message is asking us if they made the right decision. I don't know how to answer that question. I don't know if there is a right decision in that situation. I think the real answer is that there are no right decisions anymore. There are only choices that people have to make, knowing that every choice means someone will suffer or die. This is what moral collapse looks like. This is what it means when civilization ends.
We're getting updated information about the triggering event, the cyber intrusion that caused the launches. Analysts who have been working on this question believe they have identified the source. It appears that a software update pushed to military systems approximately 6 weeks before the launches contained a deeply embedded vulnerability that was not the result of intentional malicious code, but rather a complex interaction between several different software components that created an unintended execution pathway. This vulnerability was exploited not by any human actor, but by an automated security testing system that was probing networks for weaknesses as part of routine defense operations. When this automated system found the vulnerability, it triggered a cascade of responses across interconnected networks that ultimately sent launch authorization signals to nuclear weapons systems in multiple countries. The critical point here is that no one intended this. No nation attacked another. No terrorist organization planned this. This was automation interacting with automation in ways that no one predicted, creating a catastrophe beyond imagination through nothing more than technological complexity exceeding human ability to manage it.
Alex, I think that explanation is almost more horrifying than if this had been a deliberate attack, because it means there's no one to blame. There's no enemy to fight. There's no way to exact vengeance or achieve justice. We did this to ourselves through our own complexity and our own failure to understand the systems we created. Every weapon was built and deployed by humans who believed they were making the world safer. Every safeguard was designed by people who thought they were preventing exactly this scenario. And all of it failed because the complexity of interconnected systems grew beyond our ability to predict their behavior. We created our own apocalypse, not through malice, but through technical inadequacy and hubris. That's going to be the lesson of this catastrophe if anyone survives to learn lessons. We reached too far, we built systems too complex to control, and we paid the ultimate price for that hubris.
We're now 18 hours into this catastrophe. Let me give you an assessment of what portions of the world remain relatively intact in terms of infrastructure and governmental function. The southern hemisphere, as we've discussed, is physically less damaged, but economically and socially collapsing as supply chains fail and refugees begin to arrive. Particular regions that appear to have maintained some degree of order include southern Brazil, central Argentina, large portions of Australia's interior, New Zealand, portions of southern Africa, and parts of Indonesia. These regions have functional governments, some electrical power from sources that weren't dependent on northern hemisphere networks, and most critically, they have agricultural capacity that wasn't destroyed. If human civilization survives in any form resembling what we've known, it will be rebuilt from these areas. But even in these relatively fortunate regions, populations are facing severe disruptions, food rationing, martial law, and the knowledge that they will receive millions of desperate refugees in the coming weeks as people flee the dying cities of the north.
I want to share a perspective from someone in Christchurch, New Zealand, because I think it's important to hear from people who are watching this catastrophe from a position of relative safety. She writes, "We're safe here. The bombs didn't fall on us, but we're not okay. We're watching the entire world die on our screens, and there's nothing we can do. My brother lived in Seattle. I don't know if he's alive. My best friend was visiting family in London when this happened. She's gone. We have food, we have power, we have order, but we also have the knowledge that we're now living in a world that's almost empty. The population centers where most of humanity lived are gone. We're survivors, but we didn't do anything to earn survival except have the luck to be born in a place that wasn't targeted. There's guilt in that. There's a horrible feeling that we should be there, that we should be suffering too, that our safety is somehow wrong. I don't know how to live with this knowledge. I don't know how to be one of the ones who made it when so many didn't."
As we approach the 20-hour mark, we need to discuss the situation with satellite systems and space-based infrastructure, because this has significant implications for what remains of global communications and navigation capabilities. The nuclear detonations produced powerful electromagnetic pulses that damaged many satellites in low Earth orbit. Additionally, the debris and radiation in space has rendered large portions of orbital space hazardous to remaining satellites. The GPS constellation is partially functional, but degraded. Communication satellites have significant gaps in coverage. Weather satellites that would normally allow us to track the spread of fallout and the development of the nuclear winter effect are largely non-functional. Earth observation satellites that might help us assess damage and coordinate relief efforts are operating at reduced capacity. We are partially blind as a species. We can no longer see ourselves from space the way we could just yesterday. This is another lost capability that people don't fully understand. The space infrastructure that took decades to build and provided services we took for granted is largely gone.
We're getting reports from multiple sources about spontaneous religious gatherings and spiritual responses to this catastrophe. In cities and towns around the world, people are gathering in churches, mosques, temples, and synagogues, seeking comfort and meaning in the face of incomprehensible loss. Some of these gatherings are peaceful, with people praying together and supporting each other. Others are taking on more extreme characteristics, with preachers declaring this the end times, with people engaging in violent penitence, with groups forming around charismatic leaders who claim to have answers or prophecies. Religion in crisis can be a source of great comfort and community, but it can also become dangerous when people are desperate for certainty and meaning. We're seeing both dynamics play out. I don't think there's any judgment to be made here. People are reaching for whatever gives them hope or purpose in a moment when both seem in short supply.
22 hours into this event. Updated casualty projections based on the latest modeling of radiation fallout patterns and the rate of infrastructure collapse are actually worse than previous estimates. The scientific community, what remains of it, and can still communicate, is now projecting first-week mortality of approximately 350 million people, up from previous estimates. The factors driving this upward revision are faster than expected spread of fallout due to weather patterns, more rapid failure of medical infrastructure, and higher casualties from the seismic events and tsunami waves than initially calculated. The 3-month projection is now estimated at between 800 million and 1.5 billion deaths. The 12-month projection is between 2 billion and 4 billion people. That upper range would represent approximately half of the human population dying within 1 year of this event. These numbers are so large that they challenge comprehension, but they reflect the best analysis of what happens when you remove the infrastructure that keeps 7 billion people alive.
Alex, those numbers mean that in the worst case scenario, there will be 4 billion people dead 1 year from now. 4 billion people. That's more than the entire global population in 1975. That's every person in the Americas, Europe, and Africa combined. If that projection proves accurate, this will be not just the deadliest event in human history, but the deadliest event by an order of magnitude. The Black Death killed perhaps 50 million people over several years. Both world wars combined killed about 100 million people. This could be 40 times worse than both world wars. And unlike those historical catastrophes, which were followed by recovery and regrowth, we don't know if recovery is even possible from this. The nuclear winter effect could suppress agriculture for multiple growing seasons. The radiation could render large areas uninhabitable for generations. The loss of technical knowledge and infrastructure could set human civilization back centuries. We might not recover. This might be the end of human civilization as a global phenomenon.
As we approach the 24-hour mark, 1 full day since the launches began, let me summarize the current state of the world as we understand it. The Northern Hemisphere is a disaster zone of unprecedented scale. Major cities across North America, Europe, and Asia have been destroyed. Electrical grids are down across approximately 80% of the developed world. Water treatment has failed in most urban areas. Medical care has collapsed. Food distribution has stopped. Between 150 and 200 million people are already dead, with deaths accelerating. The Southern Hemisphere is physically less damaged, but facing complete economic collapse, refugee crises, and the beginning of food scarcity as agricultural imports from the north cease. No region is untouched. Every nation is in crisis. There is no international authority coordinating response. There is no relief operation at scale. There is no plan. Humanity is fragmenting into isolated populations, trying to survive with whatever resources they have locally.
We're now beginning day 2 of this catastrophe. I want to talk about what survivors are going to face in the coming days and weeks, because I think it's important that people understand what's ahead. If you're listening to this right now, if you've survived the first day, your challenges are just beginning. The radiation in many areas will remain dangerous for weeks or months. The food you have will run out, the water will run out. Medical conditions that would have been minor inconveniences yesterday will become life-threatening without treatment. Injuries that would have been treatable will prove fatal. Every day will be harder than the day before. You will see people you know and love die. You will have to make choices about who to help and who to abandon. You will discover capabilities within yourself that you didn't know existed, for both good and bad. Some of you will find that you're stronger and more resourceful than you imagined. Some will discover that you are not the person you thought you were. All of you will be changed. The person you were yesterday is gone. The world that person lived in is gone. You have to become someone new to survive in this new world.
It's now 30 hours since the initial launches. We're receiving reports that the first major refugee movements are beginning to reach areas that were not directly affected. The border between the United States and Mexico is seeing the arrival of tens of thousands of people fleeing from destroyed cities in the American Southwest and Mexico. The situation there is deteriorating rapidly. Military forces on both sides have established barriers and are using lethal force to prevent crossings in some areas. While in other areas, the sheer number of refugees is overwhelming defensive positions, and people are flooding across. Similar situations are developing at the borders between Pakistan and Afghanistan, between various European nations, and between North African nations and sub-Saharan Africa. The scale of these population movements is unprecedented. We're talking about potentially hundreds of millions of people on the move over the coming weeks and months. No infrastructure exists to handle this. No refugee camps are prepared for numbers like this. Most of these people will die during the journey or shortly after arriving at destinations that cannot support them.
We need to talk about what happens to isolated populations, people who are cut off from any news or communication and don't know what's happening in the larger world. We're receiving occasional messages from ships at sea, research stations, remote communities, and other isolated locations where people know something terrible has happened but don't have full information. A message from a research vessel in the Southern Ocean describes a crew of 37 scientists and support staff who have been monitoring emergency broadcasts and understand that nuclear war has occurred, but they don't know the full scale. They don't know if their countries still exist. They don't know if their families are alive. They're continuing their research routines because it's the only thing that makes sense to them. But they know that when their supply of food and fuel runs out in about 3 months, they'll have nowhere to go. The world they left when they embarked on their research mission no longer exists. This is being repeated in thousands of locations around the world. People isolated and realizing slowly that they may be the last representatives of institutions, communities, or even nations that no longer exist.
We're now approximately 36 hours into this catastrophe. Let me give you an update on the nuclear power plant situation, because it's developing exactly as feared. We now have confirmation of cooling system failures at 11 reactor sites, with partial or full meltdowns in progress at 17 reactors. The largest concentration of failing reactors is in France, where the loss of electrical grid and the destruction of transportation infrastructure has prevented emergency crews from reaching sites with backup cooling equipment. We're also seeing failures in the United States, Belgium, Ukraine, and Japan. Each meltdown releases massive quantities of radioactive material into the environment. The reactors near population centers are particularly catastrophic because the radiation is affecting people who survived the initial nuclear strikes and are now being exposed to this secondary source of contamination. The total area that will be rendered uninhabitable by reactor meltdowns could ultimately exceed the area affected by weapons fallout. This is a crisis within a crisis, and there is no response capacity to address it.
Alex, I think we need to acknowledge that we're running out of information. Our ability to receive reports from around the world is diminishing as communication systems continue to fail. The internet is effectively gone. Satellite communications are degraded and failing. The power systems that allow people to charge devices and maintain radios are running out of fuel. We're increasingly isolated here in this station. The world is going dark, not just literally, but informationally. Soon, we may be broadcasting to no one because no one will have the ability to receive our signal. This might be one of the last comprehensive accounts of what happened. After this, history will fragment into thousands of local stories told by survivors who have no way to know what happened beyond their immediate area. The global perspective that we've maintained for the last 36 hours may not exist again for years or decades, if ever. That thought is almost as frightening as the catastrophe itself, the loss of our ability to understand ourselves as a species, as a global community.
We're now entering the second full day, approximately 40 hours since the launches. Casualty estimates continue to climb. Current projections place deaths at approximately 400 million people within the first week. That number is almost certainly going to prove conservative as we learn more about conditions in areas we've lost contact with. The pattern we're seeing is that urban areas in the northern hemisphere are essentially death zones at this point. Anyone who didn't evacuate in the first few hours is trapped in environments with no food, no clean water, no medical care, rising radiation levels, collapsing buildings, and spreading fires that can't be controlled. The death rate in these urban areas is accelerating. In some cities, we're looking at mortality rates of 90% or higher of the population that remained. The cities that were not directly struck but are in fallout zones are facing only slightly better conditions. Rural areas have better survival prospects, but are being overwhelmed by urban refugees and face their own challenges with contaminated water supplies and failing infrastructure.
We're receiving messages from people describing the breakdown of social norms and the emergence of new survival ethics. A message from someone in what she describes as a small town in the American Midwest describes how the community has established new rules. All food is property of the community and distributed by a rationing committee. Medical care is triaged with priority given to those most likely to survive and contribute to community survival. People who are too sick or injured to recover are given comfort measures but not treatment that would consume scarce resources. She writes, "We've become something we would have found monstrous 2 days ago. We're letting people die who we could save because we're making calculations about who's more valuable to the group's survival. But if we don't make these choices, we all die. I don't know if we're being pragmatic or if we're becoming monsters. Maybe there's no difference anymore. Maybe survival requires us to do monstrous things."
48 hours, 2 full days since the launches. Let me give you an assessment of what we know about the atmospheric situation, because it's developing rapidly and will determine the fate of everyone on Earth regardless of location. The nuclear winter effect is now visible to anyone with clear skies. The sun appears significantly dimmer than normal, even at midday. In the northern hemisphere, temperatures have already dropped measurably, with reports of unseasonable cold in areas that should be experiencing summer weather. The layer of particulate matter in the stratosphere is expanding and thickening. Climate models suggest that within 2 weeks, the northern hemisphere will see average temperature drops of 5 to 10 degrees Celsius. Within 4 to 6 weeks, the effect will be global. Agricultural production will cease for at least 1 and possibly 2 or 3 growing seasons. This means that even areas with stored food will face famine once those stores are exhausted. The carrying capacity of Earth for human population has dropped dramatically and will remain suppressed for years.
We need to talk about children again, specifically about decisions being made regarding children's survival. We're receiving reports from multiple communities where adults are prioritizing their own survival over the survival of children, or where decisions are being made to save older children who can contribute to work, while younger children who require more care are being abandoned. This is perhaps the darkest aspect of this catastrophe, the breakdown of the fundamental human instinct to protect our young. In some communities, people are banding together to care for all children collectively. In others, children are being treated as liabilities, as mouths to feed that don't contribute to survival. I don't know how we come back from this as a species if we survive. How do you rebuild civilization when you've crossed the line of abandoning your own children? What kind of society emerges from people who made that choice?
We're now at approximately 72 hours, 3 full days since the initial launches. This represents the 1-week mark in our coverage that we discussed at the beginning, though time has become somewhat fluid in the chaos. Let me give you the updated casualty estimate. Approximately 520 million people are estimated to be dead at this point. That's roughly 6.5% of the global population gone in 3 days. The projection for 30-day mortality is now estimated at between 1.2 and 1.8 billion people. The projection for 1-year mortality remains at 2 to 4 billion. The lower bound of that estimate assumes some successful organization of survivor communities, partial restoration of agriculture in unaffected areas, and no major additional catastrophes. The upper bound assumes continued chaos, complete failure of social organization, and cascading secondary disasters. We're still in the very early stages of this catastrophe. The nuclear weapons killed millions. Everything that comes after will kill billions.
We're now entering the fourth day. I want to read you one more message, and then I think we need to talk about what we're going to do with this broadcast going forward. This message is from someone who identifies himself as a history teacher. He writes, "I spent my career teaching students about historical catastrophes, the fall of Rome, the Black Death, the world wars, genocides, and famines and disasters. I taught them that humanity always survives, always rebuilds, that we learn from our mistakes and become better. I don't know if I believe that anymore. This isn't just another catastrophe we'll recover from. This might be the catastrophe we don't survive. And if we do survive, if some remnant of humanity persists, what kind of people will we be after this? Will we remember what we were before? Will we want to? I think about my students. Most of them are probably dead now. The ones who survive will grow up in a world I can't imagine. They'll be taught history by people who lived through this. What lesson do we teach them about what happened? What's the moral of the story?"
We've been broadcasting continuously for just over 3 days. Our generator fuel is running low. Our ability to receive information from the outside world has deteriorated to the point where we're essentially cut off. Sierra and I have been discussing what to do, and we've decided to continue broadcasting as long as we're able. But we need to acknowledge that we may not have much longer. This may be one of the final broadcasts that provides a comprehensive picture of what happened. So let me try to summarize for whoever may be listening now or may hear recordings of this broadcast in the future. On this date, 3 days ago, a catastrophic failure of interconnected military systems resulted in the launch of approximately 5,300 nuclear weapons. 4,200 of those weapons detonated. The immediate deaths numbered in the hundreds of millions. The cascading effects of infrastructure collapse, radiation, nuclear winter, and social breakdown are projected to kill billions more over the coming months. Major cities across the northern hemisphere have been destroyed. Civilization as we knew it has ended.
Alex and I want to be clear about what caused this because I think it matters for whoever survives and tries to rebuild. This was not an act of God. This was not inevitable. This was the result of human choices. The choice to build weapons capable of destroying civilization. The choice to deploy them in ways that relied on automated systems. The choice to network those systems in ways that created vulnerabilities. The choice to prioritize military capability over safety margins. Every one of those choices was made by humans who thought they were being rational, who thought they were protecting their nations and their people. And every one of those choices contributed to this outcome. The lesson, if there is one, is that some technologies are too dangerous to be allowed to exist regardless of their strategic utility. We learned that lesson at the cost of billions of lives. If human civilization rebuilds, if there is a future, that lesson must not be forgotten.
We're now approximately 86 hours Shawwat into this catastrophe, entering the 4th day. Our information flow has reduced to almost nothing. We know that some communities are surviving, that some organization is emerging, that humanity is not gone extinct. But we don't know details. We don't know which cities might have pockets of survivors, which governments might still function in some form, which regions will prove viable for long-term survival. We're operating blind now, broadcasting into silence, hoping that someone somewhere is receiving this signal. Let me give you the final numbers as we understand them, knowing they're incomplete and may never be complete. Total deaths as of this moment, approximately 520 million people. Projected deaths over the next 30 days, an additional 700 million to 1.3 billion. Projected total deaths over 1 year, 2.5 to 4 billion people. That's between 30 and 50% of the human population. The world population before this event was approximately 8 billion people. The world population 1 year from now may be as low as 4 billion.
We need to talk about what remains, what humanity still has, despite all that's been lost. We have survivors in the southern hemisphere who have infrastructure, food production, and social order. We have isolated communities in the northern hemisphere that may persist if they're far enough from fallout zones and have access to food and water. We have knowledge that survived in people's minds, in books that weren't destroyed, in databases that might be recoverable when power is restored. We have the capacity to rebuild, though it will take generations. We have, most importantly, the fact that humans are adaptable and resilient and capable of extraordinary things when necessary. We created this catastrophe through our choices, but we also have the capacity to create recovery through different choices. The question is whether the survivors will have the wisdom to make those different choices, whether they'll remember what was lost and why, whether they'll build something better or simply repeat the same mistakes.
As we approach the 1-week mark, approximately 168 hours since the launches, our situation here has become untenable. Our generator fuel is nearly exhausted. We have no way to resupply. This will likely be our final broadcast. Before we go silent, I want to state clearly what happened for anyone who finds records of this broadcast. On the date we've been calling Day Zero, a cyber vulnerability in nuclear command systems resulted in the unauthorized launch of thousands of nuclear weapons. The cause was not a deliberate attack, but a systems failure triggered by interconnected automated systems that exceeded human ability to control. The result was the largest catastrophe in human history. Approximate death toll at 1 week, 800 million people. Projected death toll at 1 year, 3 to 4 billion people. Major cities destroyed include Washington, Moscow, Beijing, London, Tokyo, Delhi, and dozens of others. Entire nations effectively ceased to exist, including much of the Northern European community, large portions of North America, and most of Eastern Asia. The Earth has been plunged into nuclear winter that will suppress agriculture for years. Human civilization as it existed has ended. What emerges from this catastrophe remains to be determined by the survivors.
This is Sierra Lane. I want to end this broadcast with a message for survivors and for whatever future may exist. You're living through the worst moment in human history. The world you knew is gone. Most of the people you loved are dead or will be soon. You're facing hardships that previous generations could barely imagine. And despite all of that, you have to keep going. You have to survive, not just for yourself, but because humanity needs everyone who makes it through this. Every survivor is precious. Every person who lives is someone who can pass knowledge to the next generation, who can help rebuild, who can remember what we were and what we lost. Your life matters more now than it ever did before. Don't give up. Don't give in to despair, even when despair seems like the only rational response. Find other survivors. Form communities. Share resources. Help each other. Be kind when you can afford to be kind. Be ruthless when survival demands it. And have the wisdom to know the difference. Remember that this happened because we failed to control the technologies we created. Don't make the same mistake. Build something better. Be better than we were.
Final statistics for the record. Best estimate of immediate deaths from nuclear strikes, 112 million people in the first 48 hours. Deaths from radiation, injuries, and initial cascade effects in week 1, approximately 680 million additional deaths, bringing total to approximately 800 million. That's 10% of global population dead in 7 days. Projected deaths over the next 21 days, an additional 800 million to 1.2 billion. Projected deaths over the next year, total of 3 billion people, approximately 37% of the global population. Nations effectively destroyed as functional entities. The United States, Russian Federation, China, United Kingdom, France, Germany, Japan, and approximately 30 other nations. Habitable area of Earth reduced by approximately 30% due to radiation. Agricultural capacity reduced by 60 to 70% due to nuclear winter effects. Technological capacity reduced to approximately 19th century levels in most areas. Time required for recovery to pre-catastrophe levels of technology and quality of life, estimated at 75 to 150 years, assuming successful survival and rebuilding.
The sun is setting outside our station. In a few hours, our generators will fail and will go dark. Alex and I will try to survive, try to find other people, try to be part of whatever comes next. We don't know if we'll succeed. We don't know if this broadcast reached anyone. We don't know if anyone will ever hear this recording, but we had to try. We had to document what happened. We had to bear witness. To everyone who's listening, to everyone who survived, to everyone who will be born into the world that comes after this, remember us. Remember what we were, remember what we lost, remember how it happened. Don't let this be forgotten. Don't let this be repeated. Build something better. Be something better. The future depends on you now. Make it worth the cost of everything we lost. This is Sierra Lane, signing off.
This is Alex Mercer. Final broadcast. The catastrophe that began 7 days ago has resulted in the deaths of approximately 800 million people, with billions more projected to die in the coming months. The cause was a systems failure in automated nuclear command infrastructure, triggered unintentionally through interconnected vulnerabilities. This was not war. This was not an attack. This was humanity destroyed by its own creations through failures of design, foresight, and wisdom. We built weapons that could end the world, and we built systems to control those weapons that we did not fully understand. When those systems failed, we paid the price for our hubris. To the survivors, you are the future of humanity. Everything depends on what you do next. Remember what happened. Learn from it. Don't repeat it. Build better. Be better. This is Alex Mercer, broadcasting from a dying world to whoever may hear this in whatever future exists. May you find the wisdom we lacked. May you build the world we failed to preserve. This station is going off the air. God help us all.